Nipun Mehta is the founder of Charity Focus, which is a nonprofit which helps other nonprofits by offering various services. I think they initially started with offering IT services, creating websites, and so forth. In case you're interested in some data, there's 1,800, 500 members currently, probably growing, and over 100 million hits per year to that portal. Some of his personal accomplishments include awards such as the Jefferson Award for Public Service, which is a very highly esteemed award, as well as the President's Volunteer Service Award. Nipun sits on the advisory boards of several foundations, including the SEBA Foundation, the Dalai Lama Foundation, and Airline Ambassador. And I hope he tells that story because it's a wonderful story of how that began. But more important than some of these facts, I had a chance to meet Nipun a few weeks ago when he came to speak at a different event, and I was immediately drawn by his personal stories, his experiences, and his personal conviction towards life. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be great if he could come and share this with our class? And today we have our class here, as well as some additional friends who are outside of the class, but certainly welcome. Let me end with the mission statement that Nipun has for himself, which is great. It says, "Bring smiles in the world and stillness in my heart." And I think the stories that he'll share with us will give evidence to that kind of mission statement. Now, as far as the format, I'm just going to hand it over to Nipun to do as he wishes. I know we're going to have lots of questions, but perhaps we can save most of those questions towards the end so that we can really hear all the stories that he has for us in our very precious time together. So join me in welcoming Nipun.
There you go. Guys, is it okay if I sit on the table? Standing seems harder, and this seems equally hard. Thank you for having me here. I see a whole lot of laptops. I'm sure you're not taking notes. I thought what I'd talk about was this idea of freedom. This idea of being free, since I really love the title of this class, Designed for a Free Society. And when I had three thoughts. My first response was, oh, that's really cool. I want to live in a free society. My second thought was, a free society consists of free people. Am I free? No, maybe yes or no. And my third thought was, well, what does it take to be free? And for me, it takes an open heart to be free. I was in New York last week. And so I'm thinking of a New York story. I was walking down the streets, one of these 24th or something by Columbia, and I was on the streets, and I see a guy in front of me. It seemed like a homeless guy. He's selling, if you want to call it selling, candy bars. So he looks at that candy bar, and he's like, goes up, here, candy bar, here, big candy bar, keep the big candy bar, only for $1, only for $1. He's going up to everybody and trying to sell this candy bar. And I see all of this happening. Everybody's rejecting him, so he's feeling down. And then I see all of that, and I'm approaching him. He's going slower and slower, and I'm going faster and faster. And he goes up to a little kid. That was his last customer. And he's like, for $1. It's a big candy bar, for $1. And Mom's like, whiskey will get away. There was something about that interaction that I kind of felt bad. I felt bad for that guy selling the candy bar. He only had, he had $1. I mean, he just wanted $1. It was a big candy bar. I don't know if it was his or not, but he was really constantly getting rejected. So I go up to him and I started to strike up a conversation. I said, hey, how you doing? Forget about the candy bar. How you doing? And he immediately broke something, a veil between us, and we started to talk. Just in a few minutes, I said, that candy bar, did I order it? Or did you steal it? And he's like, listen, yeah, man, I stole it. But he's like, life is tough out here in the streets, you know what I mean? And it's like, I got a couple broken teeth and the whole lecture. And it's like, life is tough. And he started to tell me about his life. And so we go on. And I said, Hector, his name was Hector. I said, can I ask you to do a little experiment? It's like, sure. What? I said, I have $1 here. You were trying to sell this for $1. So I'll give you $1. But I want you to give me the candy. I want you to go and give the candy to somebody you don't know. Here's this guy constantly getting rejected. Now there's a candy bar in his hand, and he's going to be gifted. But this guy, what he said to me, and it stayed with me for a long time, he said, if I do that, like, will he punch me? And I was like, okay, but have you ever given anything to, no one punches you when you give them something, right? To him, it was such a foreign concept that he was afraid of giving. And at some level, you're like, oh, that's life on the streets. But at some level, that's really my journey. That's really our journey. We're afraid that, oh, if we do this, we'll have less. And I'm not going to do it. And that is very profound. So how do you process things? Because there's so many ways to spin that story, right? In your own head. How do you process that? And how you process that is a function of how open your heart is. And how open your heart is a function of how you will design things in the world, how you will be in a free society. So a friend of mine had another homeless experience. I'll share a couple of homeless stories. Because homelessness is so simple, we're all faced with it, but yet we respond so differently to it. And I think if we just pay attention to that, we can really find the source of our ethics in somewhere in there. So another friend of mine, he had an interesting story. He made up a rule. He said he's going to give $1 to anybody who asks him for money. He's an actor. He was actually an actor on General Hospital. And so, I don't know how that works. And a soccer player and a singer. And he decided, I'm going to give $1 anytime somebody asks me. This is my move from scarcity to abundance. I don't have much, but I want to just give every time. And so he's like, okay, I'm going to do it. And he sees somebody and they don't even ask him for it. He's afraid that they're going to ask him, he's going to run out of money. But for 8 days, nobody even asked him. Then somebody finally asked him, he's like, yes, please, here's my $1. He's really looking forward to giving it. Finally, someone cared to even ask him. So this was 2006, November 2006. A couple weeks ago, he's in New York, and he's walking down the street. It's really cold. And he sees a homeless man. And this guy asks him for $1. And he says, okay, I'm going to give him $1. But it's really cold. It's snowing. This guy's out here by himself. He's got a funky sign. His sign doesn't say, give me money. It says, what did he say? Voldemort stole my wand or something like that? It's the Harry Potter thing. And so somehow he was struck by it. And so he started talking to him. And he sits down on the ground. And he panhandles with him for an hour and a half. He's the Hollywood guy on the streets of New York with a homeless person for an hour and a half. In an hour and a half, this guy made 70 cents. And they start talking about money. And they say, well, everybody thinks my sign is funny, but nobody really gives money, Everybody's still into their own head. So I don't think the sign is. But sometimes people just come and give. And he started getting into all these stories, and he's like, one time, somebody gave him $20. Just dropped the 20 and then just kept walking. I was like, wow. And this is like one of these legend on the streets kind of stories. It's like, there's this one guy way out in this street and that street, and this is where he panhandles. And somebody gave him $100. And this guy has spent an hour and a half. He's never spent time on the streets ever in his life. He decides right then and there, and he's going to give him everything he has in his wallet. He happened to have, he's a struggling actor in some sense, and he happened to have $200. He's going to buy something else, 200 something, and he empty it all. Now, I thought it was a really inspiring story. So we run one of these kindness portals, I put it up. And it just infuriated a whole series of people. It's like, you do this is how you propagate homelessness. You do this, and this is, and there's so many. It's like you're like one of these rich trust fund kids, aren't you? I've seen your type. You haven't struggled at all in life. And people get all these, I was like, oh my God, there are so many different perspectives. And I think the third one was third, which happened to a friend of mine. He's at Stanford D School. His design school is, I don't know if D School is the short thing, I think it is. IDEO founder founded this school, and he's taking a class. And as part of the class, they say, if you're going to design something for somebody, if you're designing products for infants, you got to be at the level of the infant. Like, you got to be able to have that visual. You got to have that awareness of that. So everybody was doing different exercises to increase their awareness. And so he decided, right here, front in Stanford, he's a student right now, he decided he's going to spend a night on the university end in ragged clothes. And he just like stood there. It was really cold. He's like, darn, I picked a cold night. I should have picked an easier night. But it's cold, and he's there, and he's struggling. And at 4 a.m., people come up to him. And there's one guy, and he had so many different experiences. You know, one woman's like, here, I'll give you this. And she's still holding on to it, and he's about to take it. And she starts giving him a lecture. At the end of this lecture, she whisks away the money. Well, you know, how does a business school student process all of that? I mean, it's a struggle, you know. But then at 4 a.m., somebody comes by. He's like, hey, you hungry? And the guy's like, no, because he wasn't really planning on having food on the streets. And this guy's like, I found some food on the, you know, in the different trash cans and stuff. You know, I got some extras. And he said, no, I'm okay. 4 a.m., this guy who's homeless, he wants to be generous to the homeless. Then he says, are you cold? Because I found all these rags, you know, you can maybe use these rags. This guy, Lloyd, is completely moved by this experience. You could sit here in rooms, classrooms, process all this, goes in 1 year, goes out. Can go in 1 year, go out the other. You can take serious notes, you can research everything, but that one night, when he's out there on the streets, it's a very profound experience. And he processes it in his own way. So no judgments on how you process it, but we have to be rooted in experience. Yesterday, I was having a discussion with a friend of mine, talking about why people serve. And what is this journey of service? Like, what are the different stages that we go? And I said, well, the first stage is a utilitarian stage. Let's just stick with the homeless example. I see a need, I'm moved, and there's that some aha thing that happens. Oh, this guy doesn't have, I have, let me just give it to him. You go through that. And that's the utilitarian, sort of a functional view. This person is missing something, I have a piece, let me just do that. Then there's the second stage, where you say, well, yeah, but tomorrow he's going to be hungry again. So maybe I should create an infrastructure. Maybe I should, and maybe there are homeless people. Maybe I can create a little homeless shelter, and more people can go. It's a systematic way to go about it. And that's sort of the intellectual process. That's the second stage. But so many times in that second stage, you lose something. It becomes very cerebral. You lose connection that you had in the utilitarian sense. You know, where it was like this direct contact. Now it's a lot of it is in your head. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's use for that. But when it's just in your head, you miss out on a whole bunch of data points that are subtle, that can't be measured. And so the third stage is, well, spiritual, if you want to call it that. I call it spiritual. Where you find that the problem and the solution are intertwined, and they're dynamic in every moment. So it's not like I'm going to take this and I'm going to go home, solve it, and come back. By the time you come back, it's a different equation altogether. It's a very dynamic thing. And you realize that by you just being there with that person in that moment, by you being there listening to me, allows me to speak right now. And tomorrow, maybe vice versa. And it is in this dynamic moment that we are creating our realities. And that response to that dynamic moment has to be dynamic. If you're tuned in to all the different data points that are available and accessible to you. So how can you do that? And to me, that becomes a spiritual form of service. That becomes a dynamic response to each moment. And that's a very tough thing. But I've decided to dedicate my life to that third category. And I sort of went through all the stages. But usually people go from utilitarian to intellectual to then spiritual, right? Even Bill Gates. I heard Bill Gates opened for me today. Is that true? What can I say? Even Bill Gates at Davos said capitalism is not enough. It doesn't work. You need creative capitalism. He's got all the money in the world. Go ahead, solve the problems of Africa. You can't do it. He acknowledged that very consciously. He's trying. I'm sure he wouldn't say he couldn't do it. But money alone is not going to solve a lot of these problems. So a lot of people go from utilitarian to functional, I see a problem, let's solve it, then intellectual, how can we scale it, and then finally get to the spiritual, where it's very dynamic, where it's like very instantaneous, and it's a in-the-moment kind of a response. But I've had an opposite journey. My journey's been from inside out to then saying, oh, I'm doing inside out stuff, it attracts him, now we got all this energy, well, let's create a framework that allows us to scale, so we create that, and they say, oh, maybe this can actually be useful to the world. So that's been our journey. I was in 99 in the Silicon Valley. Some of us decided to go to a homeless shelter and build a website. And he said, we're here to help. And we ended up building them a website, and they were really happy about it, and we were really happy. So we said, let's tell our friends about it. And our friends then joined in, and then 4 people became 40 people, became 400 people. 4,000 people. And like that, we just kept on going. But it was not a process of let's create a mass revolution, let's create the social change, and then realizing that you can't do it. For us, it was very much an inside-out sort of approach. And I often think about, as I think you were alluding to, perhaps in discussions in your class, I often think about what were the incentives? What motivated me to do that? What were the guiding principles? And when I've thought about it, I was asked that question one time at the Santa Fe Institute. I don't know if you guys know the Santa Fe Institute. They study complexity. They study things that are very complex. And they have all these Nobel laureates and whatnot. So one time I was in this space and I was like, what do I say? I don't really know. I mean, a large part of my thing is I don't know. I do what makes sense in the moment. But I don't know. In the larger scheme of things, I could approximate and sound good, but then you really know deep down in your hearts, that's an approximation. That's not fully accurate. How can you know, the butterfly effect, right? Do one small thing and it creates like a hurricane somewhere else in another part of the world. I can't possibly know all of that. So I have a tough time, boxing things in. But I was there, I had to give a talk, and so I said, all right, I'm going to come up with 7 things. So I came up with 7. And I had to remember them, and I like to just speak off the cuff like I'm doing now. So this was a way for me to remember them. So it went like this. It's spelled S-E-R-V-I-C-E, it was in mind. And the first one was S. S for me stood for selflessness. And I suppose for me, the way there's stories to everything. Who wants to just hear principles, right? So I'll share a couple stories. I was told this by an Indian monk, but actually I was told that it's on like page 300 something of Robert Percy's book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It's a story of monkeys, how to track monkeys, and you have a whole bunch of nuts in a jar, and monkeys go in to grab the nuts, and the jar opening is such that the hand goes in, the fish doesn't come out. So all you have to do is let go, and you're free. But people don't do it, so you trap yourself. And selflessness is a really, and sometimes you learn, I've learned selflessness in so many different ways. One time I was giving a talk, and he asked me to speak on Hinduism. And I was born a Hindu, but I don't classify myself in that way, so I tried to talk him out of it. I was like, are you sure you want me? They're like, yeah, we want. I was like, are you? I don't do robes or I don't, none of it. It's like, yes. So I went, and I had this idea of what I was going to talk about, and I gave my talk. And it was a small group of people, and so I was like, okay, cool. This was nice. There were maybe 30 people. And after I finished, this was in the morning, and after I finished, a maintenance guy comes, and he starts putting the mic on. I was like, well, that's a little odd. And who puts a mic after the talk? It's like, I just finished it. He's like, I said, what is this for? I thought maybe some elaborate Q&A or something, And he says, no, That was just a study circle. Now you have to give your real. The whole audience is waiting, right? And there were like 300-400 people in this place. And I just thought I had finished what I was going to talk about. So I go into this room full of people. I have a mic on now, and I have absolutely no idea what it is. Like, none. A complete blank. And so I said, I'm going to call myself out. And I said, I'm here before you, and I have no idea what I'm going to talk about. And it was so beautiful to come from that space, to not know at all. I mean, I didn't want that. I would not volunteer any of you. I would not wish that on any of you. I would not volunteer myself for it, but it was profound. I went and I shared what came up, and it was a very, very profound thing. And afterwards, all, whatever, a few hundred of them gathered in a circle, and they said we'd like to thank you. Their way of thanking was having the person come to the center. So all these people wishing gratitude, and I'm at the center. And I mean, I went to Berkeley, and there's a lot of pot. And I can tell you, not that I've tried, I haven't. But I can tell you, nothing would compare to what I felt in the center of that circle. Just raw goodness. And I think of what happened in that whole process, and it came about because I let go, because I had no idea what was being said. So this idea of selflessness is a profound thing. It's actually a design principle. The way we design shared focus is in a very distributed, decentralized way. And we were not afraid of dying. So what? Everything dies. You die, I die. Organizations should die. Why should they continue for 800 years? If they're not serving a purpose, why have this false sense of security? So we never designed it that way. And it has had very, very fascinating and interesting ramifications. And we can talk the whole time on that. The E, S is for selflessness, and the E for me stands for experience. Fish in the water, swimming around, right? There's a story of like wise fish and young fish. The young fish goes to the wise fish. Where is this water that everybody's talking about? It's everywhere. It's all around you. You don't know it. And so how can you actually experience what is around you? Once you experience it, it's right there. It's easily accessible in every moment. We have this thing called smile cards, which I always mention because I love it. It's so small. And people get these smile cards. I actually brought a bunch. I think it's something to share that with. So this is a whole idea of doing something small for somebody. Pick up your neighbor's trash, because it's lying outside. I've done this many times. And you leave this card. They get it and they say, "Where's my trash?" Oh, I see a smile. It says, "You've just been tagged. Experiments in Anonymous Kindness is the name of the game, and now you're in. You pay it forward." You don't know who did this for you, but now you get to pay it forward. Pretty interesting, right? And I get it. I think it's very powerful. I like to do this all the time. You know, make random people smile with an act of kindness. I think that's a wonderful use of my time. I may not get credit, but that's cool. You know, but some people just don't get it. They're like, they either think it's too silly, or it's childish, or floofy, or whatever. You know, I don't know what they think, but they don't get it. And then every so often they'll come back and like, you know what? I got it last weekend. I was at IKEA. Actually, somebody shared this story recently. Says she's doing her PhD at Stanford Berkeley, and she said, you know, I really didn't get smile cards for a long time. Her boyfriend would keep telling her about it. You should do it. You should do it. He's also doing his PhD, and somehow like it just didn't jive. She says one time I went to go get some stuff at IKEA, and I was in a rush, so I just scooted into a parking spot and got my stuff, came back, and closed my car, and there's a note on my car. And the note says, "You're a terrible parker. You need to pay more attention to where you're going. Because of you, I couldn't get into my car from this side. People like you make the world a miserable place." Like, just going on this thing. It's like this person has taken time to write you a note, but it's a nasty note, you know? And she thought about it the whole day. It wouldn't go off her mind. You know, she's thinking, and she's saying, wow, what a terrible thing to do. Like, why would you want to go out of your way to meet somebody and say how terrible they are? They really are. Oh, wait a second. That's what these smart cards are. Except that instead of terrible thing, you're doing something wonderfully kind. Oh, I wish somebody would have done that for me. Instead of me, it's just like, my God. So people get it in all kinds of different ways. And you have to really focus on experience. We have till 6:45. We want to do Q&A. Because with each one of these, I could like tell you so many stories. You know? I mean, I share stories, right? I could skip it. We want to do Q&A for how long? Can you give me a rough? You don't care.
6:45. What time is it? I don't know. Like.
All right, I'll give you one more story. This guy, a friend of mine, he's a very big industrialist, and he also didn't get it. Like he looks at this, and one of the things we do with this is it says go to the site if you want to, want more ideas, inspiration, and cars. So anybody anywhere in the world, it's an anonymous site, but anybody anywhere in the world can get these cars. So this guy looked at me, and he runs, Sony Entertainment Television, big company, and he looks at me and it's like, going, good heart, but this is not sustainable. How are you just giving out free cars to anybody in the world, anonymous, not or anything? Like, what is, this is not going to work. Yeah. And I said, okay, fine, don't worry about it. I tried to tell him, but we just moved on to other things. Our breakfast that morning, he gets a call from his wife in Singapore. And I'm supposed to take him to the airport, and so his wife just called to make sure he's okay. And he asked a very simple question. He's like, well, how can I get you something? And I was like a little curious, what would a millionaire's wife want? I mean, she can buy anything she wants. It's like, what's she going to say? So I was just tuning in. And it turns out, she says she wants juicy fruit chewing. You can't buy chewing gum in Singapore. I'm like, oh, well. So we go out. My car's got a flat. So I call up my mom. My mom says, I tell my mom, we got to take you to the airport. We're a little late, so hurry up. My mom rushes through. We come and we go to, and since my mom came, just out of courtesy, we went up, had some juice before he said bye. As a result of all this, he wasn't going to be able to get his juicy fruit because unexpected things happen. Now we're at this table, and we're sitting there talking, and we get up. Everybody picks up their bags. It's like, there's one more bag left on the table. Is it yours? The guy says, no. My mom's like, no, it's not mine. He looks in there. It's a package of fruit. We will smile. This guy, we didn't understand. He's like, how's this going to work? How are we going to get on? All of a sudden, we're like, we stop. I get it now. He gets it that when your heart is moved, it will respond in a similar way. You're not. The sustainability plan is generosity itself. You move people, and people will offer what you need. People will offer what they can offer. And the whole thing works in that way. This is how nature is. So you have to really work with this whole idea of experience. And that's a very important thing. R stands for ripple effect. It's a very hard concept in some sense because we want to get credit for everything. Right? We want the ripple effect is I do something for you, you do something for someone else, you do something for someone else. And the whole world changes in that way. You have to sort of just trust that process. So many times when you do generous things, some people just take advantage of it. Right? And that can really, we run this restaurant. Right? Among one of the experiments, like we do stuff like this all the time. This is my life, I love it. Well, we run this little restaurant as an experiment. And at this restaurant, your bill says 0, 0. Like at the end, you eat your meal, and it's like your meal has been paid for by somebody before you. You have no charge. If you'd like, you can pay forward for somebody else to have to do. And you can put whatever you want in that envelope, and you put that envelope in that box as you leave. And you look at that, and you're like, how is that going to survive? People are just going to eat, they're going to take, they're going to, guess what? It's real, it survived, and we actually had more money than our expenses. But sometimes you see some people, we say, you just know that this guy is not going to pay money. You know, you just know that he like walks in with raggedy stuff and maybe shoes, maybe no shoes, and you're like, okay, you know, the judgmental mind is very strong. And you start boxing people in. That actually becomes your biggest limitation. And so there is a lot of that. But then you realize this power of the ripple effect. It's like, fine, somebody else was greedy, somebody else just took, but somebody else benefited deeply. And they will then pass it on, and they will then pass it on. And maybe somebody just heard about it and wants to make a contribution. We had one time, it was a volunteer's birthday, so some other volunteers went to the bakery to get cake. And you go to the, you know, there's a woman behind them. It's like, oh, that's a big cake you're getting. You must have a big party. Can I join? Well, actually, you can. And so they said, what do you want? And they started talking. He said, well, we run this place called Crown Kitchen. And it's a sort of gift economy restaurant, and anybody can come. Well, that's interesting. And then he started talking about a few stories. And she used to be the movie. She's like, wow, this is in Berkeley, right? I can't believe it. They get their stuff, you know, and they go, they get the cake, they're out, they're in the car, they're about to go out, and this woman was behind them, gets her stuff, moves out. She sees them in the car, and she has windows roll down, and she's like, I just had a quick question. Can I make a donation to Crown Kitchen? This guy's like, well, I don't know, can you? We never received a donation. People usually just pay what they want after, and there was somebody who just ran and gave it. And they're like, before they can do the process, she like whisks out a bill. And it's $100 bill. And guess what? That would have been the first day we would have been short. Were it not for that $100. Random coincidence? Maybe. But such kinds of things happen all the time. They happen all the time when you're tuned into it. So this power of ripple effect is really a deeper value called trust. To not think that people are out to get me, then what's going to happen? You know, there's scarcity and I need to keep more. I need to build all these walls around me. Oh, isn't this a class where you talk about having as little walls as possible? So I'm in the right place. But this idea of trust is profound. We can talk about it. So that's the R. The V stands for versatility. Bruce Lee used to say, you know, when people would ask, and people like me were fascinated by Bruce Lee type. Bruce Lee never lost a fight in his life. I mean, not that I fight, but you know, that's kind of cool. So he could go up to 8 people, you just like knock them all out. He had this half-inch punch. He could basically kill you with a half-inch punch. This guy had superhuman abilities. I mean, they had to like, they couldn't even capture him in slow motion. That's how fast he was going. So somebody asked Bruce Lee one time, what is your secret? What's your secret? I mean, what's breaking it? He said, you must be like water. You must take the shape of the container. Water, a child can move with water. At the same time, water can move not when it's broken. He says, that's really, you gotta be agile. You gotta just move. A friend of mine, we host these Wednesday night meditation, open house kind of a sit at our house. For the last decade, my parents have been hosting it. And anyone is welcome. We sit for an hour in silence, and we share aha moments in the second hour. Not like this, not like I know and you guys are listening. This is in our circle, so everybody shares their aha moments. And in the third hour, we have dinner in silence. And every week, there's usually 30 to 40 random people that come. And over the years, I mean, this has been going on for a decade. It's amazing. It's amazing. And so, one time this girl comes in, and she shares this beautiful story of how she was trying to get a carpool ride to get to our house. She's on the phone, and she's talking, and somebody behind her, like, hits her. And she says, all right, well, you're not going to react. You know, I'm going to deal with it. Just keeps talking. 2, maybe 10 seconds later, another round. Now she's getting a little agitated. And 10 seconds later, another round. Now she's decided, I'm going to hang up the phone, deal with the situation, I'm going to relive this guy. She turns around. With that, with anger, with rage, with this idea of, I'm going to fix this organization, right? Where does she come? A blind person. Trying to find a way. This little life. But if you're not see, versatility is not like judge. As soon as you judge, it's like, I'm going to show him. Well, the person who is bringing you suffering, who knows what kinds of suffering they had to face to bring you that in the first place? Like, who knows what's behind that window? Who knows the history of that? I don't. And so why should I pass a judgment? And as soon as you let go of that, you start to become very versatile. You start to become very agile. You start to be comfortable with change in every moment. If you don't do that, you're stuck. You're in trouble. Even if you're lucky, then all you do is manifest a version of reality that you know. So that's the beauty. Being versatile. I can share a bunch of stories. I was having a conversation, I want to say, 14 months ago, with this guy, who's the editor of the magazine. And we were having this conversation at the Cafeteria. In the middle of this conversation, this guy goes up to artists. It's a beautiful thing. I actually have a few copies of this magazine. He goes up to unsuspecting everyday artists, like a sweeper. One of the interviews he did was with this guy who was sweeping a public park, a Filipino guy. He goes up, starts talking to him. He realizes he's an artist and he makes this intricate wooden carving. And what does he do? Does not sign it. What does he do? He leaves him out in a public place to do that. He's like, this is a place with a conscience, and so I just want to leave him. And so he asks him in an interview. I mean, think of the psychology of a person like this. He asks him in an interview. He says, so aren't you afraid that somebody will take this? And he responds to him and he says, well, actually I'm not. You want one? Here. Yeah, no, he's expressing his inner goodness through his art, and that's it. He's just doing it. And so this guy who is having, I mean, this is how a lot of our projects come about, right? This guy who writes, I mean, I would love to listen to a conversation with that man who for his whole life has done these wooden carvings and just leaves it anonymously. The stuff that he could easily sell, just leaves it. And so here's this conversation. So he does conversations with these kinds of social artists. And I said, Richard, what you're doing is too valuable to be sold. Took him a second to process that. Like, too valuable to be sold. All right. It should be doing what? He looked up. He's got 15 years, runs this magazine. I mean, all from Harvard and Columbia to University of Rhode Island, all the major art schools, all subscribe to it. He says yes. And he says yes again. Third time he says, let's do it. Right now. He decides to send a refund to all of his people, and he says, I will not only accept money in the spirit of gratitude. So if you move to offer, whatever you move to offer, you offer that. There is no price. I mean, it's kind of arbitrary, right? Like, how much are you worth, right? Your time, how much is your time worth? How much is this piece of art worth? How do you figure that out? It's kind of arbitrary. We try to come to some average, but it becomes a silly game. So he decided not to do it. And so that was one of our projects. It's called conversations.org. If you see this magazine, it's amazing. It's a gift economy magazine. No advertising, none of this asking business. You just give. And you say, how is that going to work? Well, it does work because people are moved when they have an experience of generosity, when they have an experience of gratitude, they want to express that, and it inevitably comes back. So that's the V. I stands for interconnectedness. That's how we're all intertwined. You can look at me in this moment and say, here's some guy, an hour later, you never see him again. Or you can actually just genuinely be here. You have that choice. Everybody has that choice. I could do the same. I could say, 4 laptops, these guys are semi here, you guys are all here. So they're semi here, they're semi not here. What is this? You know, they can't even like, you know, just concentrate on one thing for an hour. Someone's giving their time, and here they are doing all these other things. And what kind of lack of attention? Just kidding. I know. I feel the urge to check email too. That's what I was thinking. But it's that interconnectedness, right? To realize that we are actually bound up with everything that we encounter in every moment. That's a profound thing. Thich Nhat Hanh, Vietnamese monk, nominated for Nobel Peace Prize by Martin Luther King, says, you know, he at one point was in an audience, and he holds up a piece of paper, and he says, "What do you see in this piece of paper?" And somebody raised their hand and said, "Well, I don't know, I see a piece of paper." He says, "What does a piece of paper mean?" He says, "Well, it's trees. What does a tree mean? It's wire. Where does the wire come from? Don't get scientific on me, but somebody said, comes from a cloud." Okay? And he turns to the audience and says, "How many of you see a cloud in this piece? How many of us have the depth, have the awareness to see our interconnection with the present moment?" So many times you just take everything first. Oh, this is a paper, you write on it. And writing has a certain function, and that's it. That's all you do. But really, who knows? There's so much depth to every single thing that we encounter, let alone human beings. All life. All even inanimate life. So that's a profound idea, this idea of interconnectedness. I was in India one time, or I was walking down the streets, and we saw a bunch of, you know, a bunch of older women who sweep the streets at night. Late at night, they come out, and just a way for them to get some extra income. In some cases, their sole income. And so we stopped, and we said, we befriended them. And we said, "Can we give you a half-an-hour break?" It was profound. We started sweeping. Complete shift in the whole paradigm, right? Traffic, everybody starts looking, saying, "What are you guys doing? Why are you doing this? This is ridiculous, you know? Who does that?" And other people are like, "Can I do that too?" And we say, "Well, did you have a chance to do this yesterday, like every other day of your life?" Never occurred to them. Half an hour? I had an extra half an hour. I mean, yeah, I could go to the mall and buy a dream that I never subscribed to, which is products that we have. Or I could actually use it to connect with another human being and deepen my understanding of humanity. That's what we wanted to do in that half an hour. We got them lemonade, they were sipping lemonade by the end of this, and we were sweeping the streets. And everybody's there. And some other guy comes and says, "Can I help?" We're like, "Sure, here's a room. Go for it." Like, "Which organization are you with?" "Well, no, we're just everyday citizens." No, what do you mean? Where's the catch? There's got to be something. No, just what's wrong with this? Can an everyday person not go out and help another citizen, another grandma, someone who be connected to? It's very profound experience. So those kinds of opportunities, once you start seeing the interconnection in everything, you just find value in the most minute things. So it's the see content in the moment. Gandhi, when he was going to go give a big speech, or probably one of the biggest speeches, he's going to address the whole nation. This is after the revolution. Major speech. Cab driver, right before, asked him, "So, Mr. Gandhi, what are you going to talk about?" He went a little preview, I guess, 5-minute preview, 5 minutes prior to the big talk. Guess what Gandhi says? "I don't know. I'm not there." I mean, if you look at the depth of that, right? I'm not there yet. It's 5 minutes. I'm addressing the whole nation. I don't know what I'm going to say. And that's content in the moment. You're here and now. And that has a very powerful impact when you start doing things with that perspective. If you have ambition, if you have greed, if you have ideas of securing and hoarding and getting benefit from things, you can't be content. And if you're not content in the moment, you're just not going to be able to, you will do different things. You will be able to do things, of course, at some approximate level. But you won't be able to have the kind of profound meaning underneath that. So this being content in the moment is a very deep thing. I met a guy, our meeting, I try to maximize my time. And so I met this guy and I said, look, I have to take a BART from Berkeley to Middlebury. And maybe we could just meet on the BART. So we had a meeting at the BART. And this guy is a really cool guy. He's a longtime Berkeley native. He must be in his 60s, and he told me about his life. And he had this very curious project. Him and his wife, every day, they go for a walk. And they go for a 2-hour walk. And on their walk, whenever they find spare change, they pick it up and they collect it. And they say, at the end, whenever they have these 2 bags, and as he described it, when the bags become too heavy for us to lift, we take them to a local food bank. And we say, please feed the people. No names, nothing, just names. And then I go and I was like, okay, that's kind of a curious project, and he starts telling me about it. He's like, oh yeah, I've found so much. I said, really? How do you have a metal detector and all that? Like, how do you do this? He's like, no, I'm just looking, you just go around and you find it. I go, oh, really? And he says, yeah, I found a lot of money that way. I said, well, what's a lot? He says, well, we've been doing this 2 hours a day for about 9 years, every day, mostly every day. And I would say we've got like $2,250. It's a lot. And I'm thinking, well, it's sort of a lot, but like somebody can make that in a day or a week or a month. It's not really all that much, 9 years of time. And this guy had been like a chief of North and South America, of his learning institution that he had. And so he was like this big guy. And so I said, well, hey, don't you ever think about, like, you could have just worked an extra week and that would have saved you 9 years of labor and looking around for like these coins, He says, well, I said, you never thought of that. I mean, don't you think of that? Like, that's the thought that comes to my mind. You do your cost benefit analysis. Is it worth my time to like to really be looking everywhere? And he says, well, actually, no. I've never thought of it. That's point blank. But no, I've never thought. And then he goes on and describes all these experiences of how, like, a homeless person will give him a nickel or 5 pennies. Or so one time he said he saw a penny in the gutter. He's like, I don't really put my hand in the gutter, right? I mean, it's like, who does that? I mean, it's a penny. It's ridiculous. But then he said, I need to help myself. He said, I do it. This is what I do. And so I'm going to go do it. And he says, in that moment, you realize why the Buddhist monks, they carry a begging bowl. You realize the humility that they must have felt. So he said, it's not so much about $2,250 that are collected after 9 years. It is about what I have become through that process. That comes, there's a deep level of contentment in the present moment. That this is. So the last thing is effortlessness. The last E is effort. How do you be in this state? Like a rose. Right? A rose gives a scent because it gives a scent, right? It doesn't say this is Professor Howard. It doesn't say this is Chris. It just says this is in my nature to give. This is in my nature to have this scent. So I just naturally do it. There's so many stories, even Gandhi's stories. I love Gandhi's stories. Gandhi has so many cool stories. He, at one time, I might have shared this before. Which one to share? I don't know if I've shared the shoe story with someone, but at one time he's in a train and he drops one of his shoes. And immediately, he goes to the exit and drops off the second shoe. It's the guy next to him, someone like me. It's like, well, that's a little ignorant. I mean, why would you drop the second one? Littering again? You already made a mistake. He says, well, what good is one shoe to me and one shoe to the guy in front? Maybe the guy behind you will have a pair, so I have to do the second one. Just spontaneously. He's like, the train is moving so fast. And it's like, how are you going to, if he is in this constant mode of effortless service, effortless giving to the present moment. And we all have that potential to be content in the moment. One last experience. So I told you about my story at the church. What was curious was when you're thrown in front of 400 people and you have no idea what you're going to say, what comes up? I looked at that and I was like, gee, I wonder what's going to happen next. What am I going to really talk about? What is going to come forth? And the story that came, the first thing I spoke was the story of how I was in India. I was really young. First time back, right? I grew up in India, and I was here, and the first time returning back. One of my kindergarten buddies had a motorbike, so he was going on his motorbike. And he was showing off, you know, how he can do all these fancy maneuvers. And like, we were going over speed bumps, and he was like accelerating. I'm like, dude, come on, man, you know. And I had just come here, my stomach was a little queasy, and all of a sudden, all this up and down, I started to throw up. So I'm going, and here are these two, maybe 13, 14-year-olds, and I'm throwing up, and he has no idea what to do. And we stop, and he's like, we're just totally confused. And this man stops. He's on a bicycle, he's carrying a little bag. From his bag, he takes out lemon. And that was the only thing he had. And he goes to a nearby person, and he chops this lemon in half. Gives me half, puts the other half in his bag, and just goes. That's it. No complicated logic. No, I need to know you. Oh, can I add you as a friend on Facebook? You know, nothing. It's just raw, simple kindness, and I'm never going to see that man again. Why did he do it? Who was that guy? I don't know. But it was very effortless for him to give. And later, many years later, I actually reflected on that. And I realized, who the heck carries one lemon in a bag going on a bicycle? It just happens to be going by. And imagine, if you just had one lemon in your purse, in your bag, maybe that was all he put it for. Maybe that's all he went out to get. And maybe half of everything he could afford to get is a whole lot. And he gave it to me without wanting to pay anything in return. Without even knowing. Without even wanting to make contact. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that made me cry in pursuit of 20 years later. I mean, it is wild. So those are sort of the 7 principles. And I would end with one final, yet another story. This is a Stanford story of a Stanford professor, and I won't name names. Reputed person, doing a lot of good work for the world, in the world, with good people. And they had a guest, a very distinguished person visiting. And so they were hosting him. And they wanted to show their labs, and the labs were on the 4th floor. And so they go to the front, you know, they go to the elevator, and they press 4, and somehow, you know, it stops at 3, they get off at 3, go wrong floor, he's a little upset, goes back in, 4th floor, and the door is locked. And so he tried, you know, they have these card key things, and they put the card keys, and he's upset, he's like, oh, you know, this is the time that everything should work, it's not working. He says, one of his TAs is with him, you go downstairs, figure this out, you do this, let's call the security light. Everybody's out, it's one of these holidays, and so like they can't get in to the door. You know, they tried pushing, nothing works. And they finally got one security. And the security guard says, yeah, sir, have you tried to knock? Never knocked on the door. Everything, to open the door, to try this, to call this person. Never knocked. All he had to do was knock. Somebody's inside and open the door. That's it. Simple. And so in some sense, that door is open to us in every moment. We just have to knock. If we don't knock, it's open. No one's going to be there. Everybody's on vacation. Everybody's out vacation with their ego. But you're not. And everything's open. Everything's accessible. It's right there. So I would say, knocking. Thank you. or not. We could all be more, yes.
So who, do you have any idea who left the juicy fruit?
Yes, my mom. I signaled to her, and I told her. And my mom gets it. She knows that people spend.
Did you know? Did you find out?
Well, I think it was obvious. And then later, my mom and I reflected, and we were like, you know what would have been really cool is to tell like somebody behind the counter and tell them, can you just go and give random juicy fruit to this guy? He still would have figured it out, you know. But nonetheless, it would have involved more people. It would have been even there. Yeah. Yes.
I have a question about how you felt about charity and politics. I guess a lot of people feel like the government should be trying to help everyone out by having universal health care and providing a minimum living standard for everyone. And other people feel like the government should just be as hands-off as possible and the charity should be doing all this stuff. I was wondering how you felt about this.
About charity in general, and if the government should be providing charity to other people?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, those are complex questions. How do I give a simple answer to that? I think a lot of times when we have access to scarce resources, we get into a mild form of evidence, and sometimes not so much. We get into a very deep form of evidence that we have, and we have because we are special. We have because we know more. We have because of so many attributes that we have. And when we start to go out and hand stuff to developing countries, for example, it comes with a lot of baggage. It comes with a lot of presumptions. And so many times those actually end up harming the countries or the people that we're trying to help. So, you know, you can nuance it in so many ways. And I'm not going to go there per se. But I do find that I think if you work with humility, the people who are doing the giving, if they work with the humility, that their liberation is tied with the liberation of those that they're giving to. So if you are going out to try to help, you see life as weak. If you're going out there to fix, you see life as broken. But if you go out to try to serve, you see life as whole. And so it's, you know, you can abstract it as like here's a political institution and here's a charitable process and how do they merge and whatnot. But I think at a very at a fundamental level, if you have people who are functioning from the space of service, which is to say that my liberation is tied to theirs, and that you're not actually giving them aid to, you know, dominate them in some secret way or not so secret, you know, over, then I think we'll come up with noble solutions that help everybody. But if you have people that are looking to seek benefit, to exploit, you know, to try to take advantage of the fortune at the bottom of the pyramid, you know, that kind of stuff is actually no good. When my wife and I, we went on a walk in India at one point, and so we stayed. Like, you know, homelessness is like a nice idea, and like we actually were starving, and our food, our meals, and bed, and everything came from people who you would think are like rotten people who are like rejects, who are not useful to society. They were actually serving us, they were feeding us, they were keeping us alive for the 1,000 kilometers that we walked. And so we had a very different perspective of what is life at that level. And to be honest, I think people who have little, in fact, even studies show this, people who have little give way more. Every study shows that. And so what does it mean? We should not have people that have a lot. But yet, that's the ideal that is sold to all of us. More money, more power, and you get to, you know, bring the change that you want to see in the world. So it's you know, you start to look at this in a very deeper way, and you realize you don't really know anything, and you can't really. I do. I feel like I don't know anything, and I really wouldn't know how to solve another person's problems, except that in that present moment, I can do what feels authentic and right. And I think if we have people that function from that space, then you will have good, noble things that come out of whatever resources you have. If you don't have that, then you are just not going. If you see them as, you know, they need to upgrade from my level of, you know, modernity, I think it's a very false view. I mean, I'm trying to dodge the question without getting into all these different things, because, that's a loaded question, because you could, Jeffrey Sachs can sit here and give a very opposite view of the whole, he thinks we should, he's in the Sachs, right, who thinks we should just dump all this money into Africa, and that's how we're going to solve the problem. I don't think so.
You go back to the first few questions you talked about. Are you free? How do you get there? And what is it?
Am I personally, if I ask myself that question, am I free? I'm totally not free. I'm stuck. I'm bound. And so everything I design is inherently flawed. So it's like, it's a terrible situation. Because I'm not. I have all these judgments, right? I have all these ideas. I have all these limitations in that sense of my own mind. And so how do I get rid of it? There's an amazing guy called Mansoba Fukuoka, right? Is that how you, I think he's a farmer, Japanese farmer. And he had this insight at the age of 25. He says, everything my mind comes up with is false. And he went around telling everybody, everything that your mind comes up with is false, because it works in a limited domain. You have to work outside the mind. People thought, you're weird. Right? And they were like, what an eccentric guy. Nobody listened to him. So he said, I need to make this relevant and concrete. So he started to do farming, and he called it do-nothing farming. So he says, I don't grow plants, nature grows plants. I just have to get out of the way as far as possible. And so all he did was he had these really intense rules, right? No, he wouldn't plow the land. That's not my job. No fertilizers, no pesticides, no weeding. These are the 4 rules he had. But you can't take the weeds out. And you say, well, that's kind of weird. How would that be effective? You know, compare that to the farm next to it. Guess what? It was super effective. People said, oh, I want produce from Fukuoka's farm. When you go there, it doesn't even look like a farm. You say, wait a second, how is all this produce coming out of it? And in Japan, they do